I was pulling weeds from my vegetable garden when I heard the clicking of high heels on my driveway, and something about the sharp, deliberate sound told me this wasn't going to be a friendly visit. Looking up from my tomato plants, I saw a woman in her mid-40s marching toward me with a clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield. She wore a crisp white blouse despite the California heat and had the kind of haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager." Her lips were pressed into a thin line of disapproval as she surveyed my front yard. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone of forced politeness that promised anything but. "Are you Nathan Vance?" I stood up, wiping dirt from my hands onto my jeans. "That's me." "Can I help you?" She stopped at the edge of my garden bed, careful not to let her cream-colored shoes touch the mulch. "I'm Patricia Thompson, president of the Meadowbrook HOA. I've received several complaints about your property." I glanced around my yard in Fresno County, genuinely confused. I'd bought this house 3 months ago specifically because it had enough space for a decent garden. The front yard was a mix of raised beds filled with vegetables, fruit trees, and native California plants I'd carefully selected for drought resistance. Everything was neat, organized, and actually produced food, unlike the water-guzzling lawns most of my neighbors maintained. "Complaints about what exactly?" I asked. Patricia's nose wrinkled as she looked at my garden like it was a junkyard. "About this, whatever this is." According to our HOA bylaws, front yards must maintain a uniform aesthetic with the neighborhood. That means manicured lawns, approved shrubs, and decorative plants only, not. She gestured vaguely at my thriving vegetable garden, a farm. I felt my jaw tighten. "It's not a farm. It's a residential garden with edible and native plants. Everything is well maintained and follows county regulations." "Well, it doesn't follow HOA regulations," Patricia said, flipping through papers on her clipboard. Section 7.3 of the Meadowbrook bylaws clearly states that front yard gardens are limited to ornamental flowers in designated areas. You have tomatoes growing in full view of the street. And are those corn stalks? Yes, and zucchini, peppers, beans, and several varieties of heirloom vegetables that are actually quite rare. I also have native California poppies, sage, and buckwheat that support local pollinators. Patricia wasn't listening. She pulled out a pre-printed form and handed it to me. "This is your official notice of violation. You have 30 days to remove all non-compliant vegetation and restore your lawn to HOA standards, or you'll face a fine of $500. After that, it's an additional $250 per week until compliance is achieved." I stared at the paper, feeling my blood pressure rise. As the agricultural commissioner for Fresno County, I spent my days promoting exactly this kind of sustainable urban agriculture. I'd given presentations to city councils about the benefits of edible gardens, worked with community organizations to establish food security programs, and helped write guidelines encouraging residents to grow their own food. And now some HOA president was threatening to fine me for practicing what I literally preached as part of my job. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said, keeping my voice level. "California state law actually protects the right to grow vegetables in residential areas. Assembly Bill 2561 specifically limits HOA authority over edible gardens." Patricia's expression didn't change. "I'm familiar with state guidelines, Mr. Vance. Our bylaws were reviewed by legal counsel and are fully compliant. Edible gardens are permitted in backyards and designated side yards, not front yards where they impact the neighborhood's visual character." "The law doesn't make that distinction," I countered. "Our interpretation does," Patricia said firmly. You'll receive instructions on approved landscaping companies that can help you come into compliance. Good day." She turned and walked back to her white Mercedes SUV, leaving me standing in my garden with the violation notice crumpling in my fist. I went inside and immediately called my assistant at the county office. Linda answered on the second ring. "Hey, Nathan, what's up? I need you to pull every HOA complaint we've received in Fresno County over the past 5 years related to gardens or agricultural issues," I said. "Specifically the Meadowbrook development." "Oh, what happened?" I explained the situation while pacing my kitchen. Through the window, I could see my garden, currently producing enough vegetables to feed my family and donate extras to the local food bank. The thought of ripping it all out to plant grass made my stomach turn. "That's ridiculous," Linda said. "You literally wrote the county's guidelines on urban agriculture. Doesn't the HOA president know who you are?" "Apparently not." "Can you also pull our files on any agricultural commissioner powers related to HOA oversight?" "You thinking what I think you're thinking?" "I'm thinking I'm not ripping out my garden. And I'm thinking that if this HOA is doing this to me, they're probably doing it to other residents who don't have the resources to fight back. I want to see how deep this goes." Over the next few days, I did my homework. Linda compiled a thick file of complaints from Meadowbrook residents, all with the same signature at the bottom of the response letters: Patricia Thompson. There were fines for vegetable gardens, citations for keeping chickens despite county ordinances allowing them, and threats against a resident who'd installed a rain collection system, even though California actively encouraged such water conservation measures. I also discovered that Patricia had been HOA president for 8 years, running unopposed in every election. The HOA board consisted of her and 2 friends who seemingly rubber-stamped her decisions. Meadowbrook's monthly dues were among the highest in the county, yet infrastructure improvements were minimal. That raised some interesting questions about where the money was going. As the 30-day deadline approached, I decided to attend the monthly HOA meeting. It was held in the community center, a bland beige building that matched every other structure in the aggressively uniform development. About 20 residents sat in folding chairs, most looking either bored or resigned. Patricia sat at a table at the front with 2 other middle-aged women who I assumed were the other board members. She was mid-sentence when I walked in, explaining some new regulation about holiday decorations. Christmas lights must be white or clear only, displayed no earlier than December 1st, and removed by January 10th. No inflatable decorations over 4 feet in height. All displays must be. She stopped when she noticed me taking a seat in the back row. Her eyes narrowed slightly before she continued. "Must be approved in writing by the board before installation." A man in front raised his hand tentatively. "What if we celebrate other holidays? I'm Jewish. Can I put up Hanukkah decorations?" Patricia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "As long as they follow the same aesthetic guidelines. Nothing gaudy or excessive. We're trying to maintain property values." The meeting dragged on through various nitpicking regulations until they reached new business. Patricia shuffled her papers and looked directly at me. "We have several outstanding violations that need to be addressed. Mr. Vance, I see you're here. Have you begun removing your front yard vegetables as required?" Every head turned to look at me. I stood up calmly. "No, I haven't, and I won't be doing so." A murmur went through the crowd. Patricia's expression hardened. "Then, as of tomorrow, you'll be subject to the initial $500 fine, with weekly increases until compliance." "I'm also requesting a formal hearing on the matter," I said. According to the HOA bylaws, Any resident facing fines over $500 has the right to present their case before the full board and any interested community members. Patricia clearly hadn't expected that. That's technically correct, but it won't change the outcome. The bylaws are very clear. Then you shouldn't have any problem with a hearing. I'd like it scheduled within the next 2 weeks as the bylaws require. She exchanged glances with the other board members, then made a show of checking a calendar. Fine. 2 weeks from today, 7 p.m. in this room. But I'm warning you, Mr. Vance, the board's decision will stand. We'll see, I said and sat back down. After the meeting, several residents approached me in the parking lot. A young woman with tired eyes and a toddler on her hip was the first. "Are you really fighting this?" she asked. "They fined us last year for our garden. We couldn't afford to keep paying, so we had to rip everything out." An older man joined us. "They got me for chickens. I had 4 hens, completely legal according to county rules. The HOA threatened to put a lien on my house. Cost me $3,000 in fines before I gave the chickens away." More stories poured out. A couple who'd been cited for solar panels, even though California law protected solar installations. A single mother fined for parking her work van in her own driveway because it was deemed commercial. A veteran who'd been threatened with daily fines for displaying an American flag that was supposedly too large, despite federal law protecting flag displays. Why doesn't anyone challenge this? I asked. The young woman shifted her toddler to her other hip. "Most of us can't afford lawyers, and Patricia's husband is an attorney. They threaten legal action against anyone who pushes back. Plus, she controls the board completely," the older man added. "We tried to get someone else elected 2 years ago. Our candidate mysteriously never received the nomination paperwork. Then Patricia said only properly filed candidates could run. It's all rigged." I took names and contact information from everyone who wanted to share their story. By the time I left, I had a list of 15 residents with legitimate grievances, and I suspected there were many more who were too afraid or exhausted to speak up. Back home, I started preparing my case. As agricultural commissioner, I had authority to investigate HOAs that violated county or state agricultural regulations. I requested official copies of all Meadowbrook HOA bylaws, financial records, and violation notices issued over the past 5 years. Patricia had to comply. It was a county-level records request she couldn't simply ignore. When the documents arrived, I spent an entire weekend going through them at my dining room table. What I found was worse than I'd expected. The financial records showed that Meadowbrook collected over $300,000 annually in HOA fees from its 150 homes. But expenses seemed inflated and vague. Landscaping services cost twice what similar neighborhoods paid. Legal consultations ran tens of thousands of dollars per year. Most suspicious was a line item called management fees that paid $50,000 annually to something called Meadowbrook Community Services. A business license search revealed that Meadowbrook Community Services was registered to Patricia Thompson and her husband, Gerald Thompson. They were essentially paying themselves out of HOA funds to manage the HOA. The violation notices painted a clear pattern of selective enforcement. Homes owned by Patricia's friends seemed immune to citations, while others were hit with multiple fines for trivial issues. One resident had been fined 8 times in a single year for things like grass clippings visible after mowing and garage door left open during daytime hours. I compiled everything into a detailed report. Linda helped me cross-reference violations with county and state regulations, highlighting everywhere the HOA had overstepped its legal authority. By the time the hearing date arrived, I had a 40-page document that laid out not just my case, but a pattern of abuse and possible fraud. The community center was packed on hearing night. Word had spread, and it seemed like half the neighborhood had shown up. Patricia looked annoyed by the turnout but maintained her professional smile as she called the meeting to order. "We're here to address the violation notice issued to Nathan Vance regarding non-compliant landscaping," she began. "Mr. Vance, you may present your defense, though I remind everyone that HOA bylaws are binding contracts that all residents agreed to upon purchasing their homes." I stood and walked to the front, carrying a briefcase full of documents. "Thank you. I'd like to start by introducing myself properly. My name is Nathan Vance, and I'm the Agricultural Commissioner for Fresno County." The room went completely silent. Patricia's smile froze on her face. "As commissioner, part of my job is to promote sustainable agricultural practices, including urban and residential food production. I also have oversight authority regarding local regulations that impact agriculture, including HOA rules that may conflict with county or state law." I pulled out my first exhibit. California Assembly Bill 2561, passed in 2019, specifically limits HOA authority over residential food gardens. While HOAs can impose reasonable regulations regarding placement and maintenance, they cannot prohibit vegetable gardens outright or force them to be hidden from view. The Meadowbrook HOA's blanket ban on front yard vegetable gardens directly violates this state law. Patricia leaned forward. "Our bylaws predate that legislation and are grandfathered in." "Actually, no. AB 2561 explicitly states that it supersedes existing HOA bylaws. Any restriction that violates the law became unenforceable when the bill took effect." I distributed copies of the relevant legal text to the board members and several residents in the front row. "Furthermore," I continued, "as County Agricultural Commissioner, I've received numerous complaints about HOA overreach in Meadowbrook that extends beyond just garden restrictions. You've cited residents for keeping chickens, despite Fresno County ordinances explicitly allowing up to 10 hens on residential properties of this size. You fine people for rain barrels, which are not only legal but encouraged by California water conservation law." I could see some residents nodding, while Patricia's face was growing red. "But it gets more interesting," I said, pulling out the financial documents. "I requested the HOA's financial records as part of a county investigation into potential regulatory violations. These records show some concerning patterns." Patricia stood abruptly. "Those are private HOA documents. You had no right." "I have every right. As a county official investigating potential violations of agricultural and residential ordinances, I'm entitled to examine relevant HOA records." And what I found was illuminating. I projected the financial spreadsheets on the wall using the community center's aging projector. Meadowbrook homeowners pay $200 per month in HOA fees. That's $2,400 per year per household. With 150 homes, the HOA collects $360,000 annually. Murmurs spread through the crowd. I could see people calculating what they'd paid over the years. Now, maintaining common areas, insurance, and basic services should cost roughly $150,000 for a community this size. But according to these records, expenses exceed income, and the HOA claims to operate at a near break-even point every year. Where's the money going? I highlighted the management fees. $50,000 per year goes to Meadowbrook Community Services for management and administrative services. This company is owned by Patricia Thompson and her husband, Gerald Thompson. Essentially, the HOA president is paying herself out of your dues to manage the very organization she already controls as an elected volunteer. The murmurs became loud conversations. Patricia's face had gone from red to pale. "That's perfectly legal," she stammered. "Many HOAs hire professional management. It is legal if properly disclosed and approved by the membership, which these records don't show. There's no vote documented, no competitive bidding process, no disclosure in the annual meeting minutes. Then there are the legal fees." I pulled up another document. $75,000 in legal consultations last year alone. Gerald Thompson is an attorney. Are these payments going to his firm? Patricia sat down heavily. One of the other board members, a woman named Susan, spoke up for the first time. "Patricia, you told us the legal fees were for outside counsel on state compliance issues." "They were," Patricia insisted. "Gerald's firm handles corporate law. We hired specialists." "Then you'll have invoices from these specialists," I said. "I'd like to see them. Because what I'm seeing looks like self-dealing and possible embezzlement of HOA funds." The room erupted. Residents were shouting questions. Patricia was trying to call for order, and the other board members looked shell-shocked. I let it play out for a minute before raising my hand for quiet. "Here's what I'm proposing," I said once the noise died down. "First, my garden stays, and all fines related to it are voided. Second, the HOA immediately ceases enforcement of any rule that violates county or state law. That includes restrictions on vegetable gardens, chickens, solar panels, rain barrels, and any other sustainable agricultural or environmental practice protected by law. And third," I continued, "the HOA commission a full independent audit of its finances going back 5 years. If that audit reveals what I think it will, the membership can decide what actions to take, including whether to report findings to law enforcement." Patricia found her voice. "You can't just demand these things. The board makes decisions, not individual residents with personal agendas." "You're right. So let's vote." I turned to address the room. All residents in good standing have voting rights on major HOA decisions. I'm making a formal motion that the HOA immediately suspend enforcement of rules that conflict with state or county law, pending a comprehensive legal review. Do I have a second? At least 20 hands shot up, along with voices shouting, "Second." Patricia tried to protest. "This isn't how we do things. Motions must be submitted in writing 30 days before a vote." "That's for bylaws amendments," said the older man I'd met after the first meeting. He was holding a copy of the HOA bylaws, flagged with sticky notes. "Emergency motions regarding legal compliance can be brought to any meeting with a second and majority approval. It's right here in section 12.4. Patricia looked at her fellow board members for support, but Susan was reading her own copy of the bylaws. "He's right, Patricia. If this is a legal compliance issue, we need to vote." The vote was overwhelming. Out of the roughly 75 residents present, only 4 voted against the motion, and I suspected at least 3 of those were Patricia's personal friends. Then someone else stood up, a middle-aged man in a work shirt. "I'd like to make another motion. That the board be temporarily suspended pending the financial audit, and that a special election be held for all board positions within 60 days. The room exploded in approval. This motion passed with an even larger margin. Patricia gathered her things, her hands shaking. "This is a witch hunt. Gerald will hear about this. You'll all be hearing from our attorneys." "Actually," I said quietly, "I think Gerald is going to be very busy dealing with his own problems. I've already forwarded my findings to the district attorney's office." Misappropriation of HOA funds is a criminal matter when it rises to this level. Patricia's face went white. She stormed out, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor, the same sound that had announced her arrival at my garden weeks earlier. The rest of the meeting was chaos, but productive chaos. Residents formed committees to handle different aspects of the transition. Someone volunteered to research independent HOA management companies. Another group offered to organize the special election. An accountant who lived in the neighborhood agreed to coordinate with whatever audit firm was selected. As people filed out, many stopped to thank me or share their own stories of HOA overreach. The young woman with the toddler had tears in her eyes. "Can I plant my garden again?" she asked. I had tomatoes and peppers, and my daughter loved picking them. It was teaching her about where food comes from. "Plant whatever you want," I said. "It's your yard. Just keep everything maintained and reasonable, and the HOA can't touch you." Over the following weeks, things moved quickly. The Interim Management Committee hired an auditing firm that specialized in HOA investigations. I provided them with all the documentation I'd compiled, along with my official county report. The audit took 3 weeks and confirmed everything I'd suspected, and worse. Patricia and Gerald Thompson had siphoned nearly $400,000 from HOA funds over an 8-year period through various schemes. The management company they owned billed for services never rendered. Gerald's law firm had charged premium rates for basic paperwork. They'd even marked up contractor costs, pocketing the difference when vendors actually charged less than what was billed to the HOA. Most egregious was a reserve fund that supposedly existed for major repairs and emergencies. The fund was supposed to contain over $200,000. The audit revealed it held less than $15,000. The rest had been quietly transferred to Meadowbrook Community Services for vague, administrative expenses. I received a call from Deputy District Attorney Michelle Rodriguez on a Tuesday morning. "Mr. Vance, I wanted to update you on the Thompson investigation," she said. "We're filing charges today. Patricia Thompson is being charged with embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. Gerald Thompson is being charged as an accessory, plus separate charges related to his role in the legal billing scheme." "Good," I said. "The HOA members deserve justice. We're also looking at civil forfeiture to recover the stolen funds." The Thompsons own several properties that appear to have been purchased with money taken from the HOA. We're confident we can get significant restitution for the victims. The arrests made local news. I watched the coverage that evening, seeing Patricia and Gerald being led out of their house in handcuffs. Patricia's perfect hair and makeup couldn't hide the devastation on her face. Part of me almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The special election brought new blood to the HOA board. 3 residents with actual community management experience won seats, along with 2 others who'd been vocal about transparency and following the law. Their first official act was to permanently revoke all HOA restrictions that conflicted with state or county regulations. My own garden continued to thrive. The tomatoes were producing like crazy, and I'd harvested enough zucchini to share with half the neighborhood. Other residents started planting their own vegetables, transforming Meadowbrook from a sterile landscape of identical lawns into a diverse community garden ecosystem. The young woman with the toddler, whose name I learned was Jennifer, planted a beautiful garden that her daughter Sophia treated like her personal playground. The older man, Robert, got new chickens, and their fresh eggs became a trading commodity in the neighborhood. Someone even started a community newsletter highlighting everyone's gardens and sharing produce surpluses. 3 months after my initial violation notice, I stood in my front yard, surveying the changes. My corn was waist-high, the tomato plants were heavy with fruit, and the native plants buzzed with bees and butterflies. Down the street, I could see similar gardens sprouting up. The neighborhood looked alive in a way it never had before. A car pulled up, and I recognized Susan, one of the former board members who'd voted to investigate Patricia once the truth started coming out. She rolled down her window. "Nathan, I wanted to apologize," she said. "I was on that board for 3 years, and I never questioned what Patricia told us. I should have pushed back when she was fining people left and right." "You voted for the audit when it mattered," I said. "That took courage. I just wish I'd been paying attention sooner." She was so confident, so sure that she was protecting property values and maintaining standards. I believed her. Susan shook her head. "I drove by here every day for months seeing your garden, and all I could think was how messy it looked. Now I see it's actually beautiful. I'd just been trained to see it as wrong." "That's how these things work," I said. "Someone in authority keeps repeating the same message until everyone accepts it as truth. Questions get labeled as troublemaking. Before you know it, a whole community is enforcing rules that don't make sense and might not even be legal." "Well, I'm growing tomatoes now too," Susan said with a smile. "Patricia would be horrified," I laughed. "Good. Tomatoes should be a basic right." The legal case against the Thompsons proceeded through the system. Gerald took a plea deal early, agreeing to testify against Patricia in exchange for reduced charges. He was disbarred and sentenced to 3 years probation with restitution requirements. Patricia fought the charges initially, but eventually pleaded no contest when the evidence became overwhelming. At her sentencing hearing, I attended as a witness, representing both the county's interest and the HOA members who'd been victimized. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Judge Helen Morrison, reviewed the case file with evident disgust. "Mrs. Thompson, you were entrusted with managing your community's shared resources," Judge Morrison said. "Your neighbors elected you, paid their dues faithfully, and trusted you to act in their best interests. Instead, you treated the HOA as your personal bank account. You stole from families, some of them struggling to make ends meet, to fund your own lifestyle." Patricia stood with her public defender, having spent most of her money on her original attorney before funds ran out. She'd aged visibly over the past months, her carefully maintained appearance giving way to a haggard exhaustion. "The financial harm is significant, but what strikes me most is the abuse of power," the judge continued. "You used your position to silence dissent, to punish anyone who questioned you, and to intimidate vulnerable residents into compliance. You created an atmosphere of fear in what should have been a supportive community." The judge sentenced Patricia to 4 years in state prison, with credit for time served. She was also ordered to pay full restitution, which would likely take the rest of her life given how much they'd stolen, and how little the Thompsons had left after legal fees. Their house was sold, along with a rental property and a vacation condo in Lake Tahoe, with proceeds going to the HOA restitution fund. After the sentencing, I stood outside the courthouse with several Meadowbrook residents who'd come to see justice served. Jennifer was there, Sophia playing with a small toy nearby. Robert came with his wife. Even some of Patricia's former allies had shown up, looking somber. "Do you think she understands what she did wrong?" Jennifer asked, watching Patricia be led away. "I doubt it," I said honestly. "People like that usually convince themselves they deserve what they take. She probably still thinks she was doing a good job managing the HOA and that we're all ungrateful troublemakers." "At least it's over," Robert said. "And at least she can't hurt anyone else now." We walked to a nearby coffee shop, a group of neighbors who'd become friends through adversity. Over lattes and pastries, conversation turned to the future of Meadowbrook and the changes still underway. The new HOA board had implemented radical transparency. Financial statements were now posted online monthly. Board meetings were recorded and archived. Any expense over $500 required membership approval. The bylaws were being completely rewritten with input from residents and review by actual real estate attorneys who specialized in HOA law. Most importantly, the new leadership understood that an HOA's job was to support the community, not control it. Dues were reduced to $125 per month since the inflated expenses and theft were eliminated. Common areas were maintained, but not obsessively manicured. Residents were trusted to maintain their properties like responsible adults. The vegetable garden movement spread beyond Meadowbrook. Other neighborhoods saw what was happening and started questioning their own HOA restrictions. I began getting invited to speak at community meetings across Fresno County, sharing information about residents' rights and how to push back against HOA overreach. At one such meeting in Clovis, a suburb just north of Fresno, I met Thomas Reid, a city councilman who'd been fighting similar battles with HOAs in his district. The problem is that HOAs were created with good intentions but zero oversight, Thomas explained. They can fine you, put liens on your house, even force foreclosure, but there's no government agency monitoring whether they're following the law or acting ethically. It's a power structure just begging to be abused. We've been working on county guidelines, I said, but they're not enforceable unless someone complains and we investigate. Most people don't know their rights or can't afford to fight. What if we changed that? What if California required HOAs to register with the county and submit to basic oversight? Annual financial audits, transparency requirements, a process for residents to appeal fines to an independent body. The idea intrigued me. Thomas and I began collaborating on a proposal for county-level HOA oversight. We researched similar programs in other states, consulted with civil rights attorneys, and gathered testimonies from residents who'd been harmed by unchecked HOA power. 6 months after my initial violation notice, I presented our proposal to the Fresno County Board of Supervisors. The chambers were packed with residents from across the county, people with their own HOA horror stories who'd heard about the presentation and wanted to show support. I stood at the podium, feeling more nervous than I had confronting Patricia. This was my job, my professional reputation, and I was proposing something controversial that would face opposition from property management companies and HOA industry groups. Honorable Supervisors, I'm here today to propose the Fresno County Homeowner Association Accountability Act, I began. This ordinance would require all HOAs operating in the county to register annually, submit financial audits, and comply with basic transparency and due process standards. I walked them through the details. Mandatory posting of financial statements, a requirement that all fines over $200 include an appeals process to a neutral arbiter, protection for residents who exercise legal rights like solar installation or food gardens, and penalties for HOAs that violate county or state law. The presentation took 30 minutes. When I finished, the public comment period began. Speaker after speaker came forward with stories of HOA abuse, a veteran who'd been fined for his service flag, a disabled woman cited for having a wheelchair ramp the HOA deemed unsightly, a teacher forced to spend thousands in legal fees fighting a lien over a garden gnome the board president found offensive. The opposition spoke too. A property management executive warned that oversight would increase costs and burden small HOAs. A real estate attorney argued it was government overreach into private contracts. But their arguments rang hollow after the parade of genuine victims who testified. After 3 hours, the Board of Supervisors voted 4-1 to advance the proposal to a formal ordinance draft. It wasn't final approval, but it was a start. I left the building exhausted but energized. In the parking lot, Jennifer was waiting with Sophia, who ran up and handed me a drawing she'd made of my garden. "Thank you," Jennifer said, "for everything. For standing up when the rest of us felt powerless." "I just had the right job title at the right time," I said. "But this doesn't end with me. Real change happens when everyone speaks up." "I'm running for city council next year," Jennifer said. "I never would have considered it before all this, but someone needs to represent regular people who are tired of being pushed around." I smiled. "You'll have my vote." 1 year after Patricia Thompson first clicked her way up my driveway, I hosted a neighborhood barbecue in my backyard. The entire cul-de-sac came, along with friends from across Meadowbrook, and even some people from other neighborhoods where HOA reforms were taking root. My garden was in full summer glory. The corn reached over my head, tomatoes hung heavy on their cages, and squash plants sprawled across the beds like green octopi. I'd added a small greenhouse where I started seedlings to share with neighbors. The backyard featured a larger vegetable plot, fruit trees, and a chicken coop I'd built with Robert's help. My 4 hens provided more eggs than I could use, so I traded them for homegrown vegetables from other gardens. As the sun set and neighbors mingled over grilled vegetables from my garden and others, I reflected on how much had changed. Meadowbrook looked different now. Walking down any street, you'd see gardens instead of lawns, people outside tending plants and chatting with neighbors, kids playing in yards that were no longer sterile showcases but actual living spaces. The county ordinance had passed its final vote 2 months earlier. Fresno County was now the first in California to implement comprehensive HOA oversight. Other counties were watching closely, and I'd been contacted by officials from Sacramento to San Diego about replicating the program. The Thompsons were both serving their sentences. The restitution fund had recovered about 60% of the stolen money, with more expected as their remaining assets were liquidated. The HOA had used some of the recovered funds to upgrade the community center and playground, improvements that had been promised for years, but never materialized under Patricia's leadership. Susan approached me with a plate loaded with food. "I can't believe it's only been a year. It feels like a lifetime ago that we were living under Patricia's reign of terror." "Power can corrupt quickly," I said, "but accountability can fix things just as fast when people are willing to fight for it." "I'm glad you moved here," she said. "I know it's been stressful for you too. But you changed this place for the better." I looked around at the gathering, at Robert teaching some kids how to collect eggs from the chickens, at Jennifer discussing her campaign platform with potential supporters, at families from different backgrounds and circumstances coming together in community. "We all changed it," I said. "I just had the right tools at the right moment." Later that night, after everyone had gone home and I was cleaning up, I stood in my garden under the stars. The violation notice from Patricia was framed on my office wall now, a reminder of how quickly authority figures can overstep and how important it is to push back. Next to it hung a thank you card signed by dozens of Meadowbrook residents and a certificate of appreciation from the Board of Supervisors. My phone buzzed with an email from the California Department of Food and Agriculture. They'd been following the HOA oversight situation, and wanted to discuss a possible statewide program modeled on what we'd done in Fresno County. They were requesting a meeting to explore how agricultural commissioners in other counties could support urban farming initiatives and protect residents' rights to grow food. I smiled and typed a quick response agreeing to the meeting. This was bigger than one neighborhood, bigger than one county. This was about fundamentally shifting how we thought about community, about authority, about the right to use our own property in sustainable ways. A year ago, I'd been threatened with fines for growing tomatoes in my own front yard. Now, I was helping reshape policy across the state. It was a reminder that sometimes the right person ends up in the right place at the right time, and that standing up for what's right can have ripple effects far beyond what you initially imagine. I pulled a ripe tomato off the vine, still warm from the day's sun, and bit into it. The flavor exploded in my mouth, sweet and acidic and perfect. This is what Patricia and people like her didn't understand. A garden wasn't just about appearance or property values or following arbitrary rules. It was about connection to the land, to our food, to the seasons and cycles that sustained life. It was about resilience and self-sufficiency and community. No HOA board had the right to take that away from anyone. The next morning, I was back at my county office, reviewing agricultural permits and discussing water allocation issues with Linda. But I felt different now, more aware of how policy decisions affected real people's lives. Every regulation we wrote, every guideline we issued, had the potential to help or hurt families trying to make good choices for themselves and their communities. "You've got a visitor," Linda said, interrupting my review of a vineyard expansion application. "Says it's urgent." A man in his 30s stood in the waiting area, looking nervous. He introduced himself as Marcus Lee from a development called Sunset Ridge about 20 miles away. "I heard about what happened in Meadowbrook," Marcus said after we'd moved to my office. "Our HOA just sent violation notices to everyone with vegetable gardens. 30-day deadline to remove them or face fines. I spent 3 months building raised beds, getting my soil perfect, planting everything my kids love to eat. They want it all gone." I leaned back in my chair. "Tell me about your HOA board." Marcus did, and the story was depressingly familiar. An entrenched president who'd been in power for years, rules enforced selectively, residents afraid to challenge decisions, bylaws that hadn't been updated in decades and violated current state law. "I don't have the resources you had," Marcus said. "I'm not a county commissioner. I'm just a dad who wants to teach my kids about growing food." "You don't need to be a commissioner," I said, pulling up files on my computer. "You just need to know your rights. California law is on your side." "Let me show you what to do." We spent an hour going through the same research I'd done, the same legal frameworks, the same arguments. I gave Marcus copies of the relevant statutes, contact information for attorneys who specialized in HOA disputes, and the name of an auditing firm that could examine his HOA's finances if needed. "You're basically giving me a roadmap for fighting back," Marcus said, looking at the stack of documents I'd printed. "That's exactly what I'm doing. What Patricia Thompson and people like her count on is residents not knowing they have options, not realizing they can push back. Once you know the law, once you understand your rights, you take back the power they've been abusing." Marcus left looking determined rather than defeated. I knew he'd face an uphill battle, but he was armed with information now. That made all the difference. Over the following months, I heard from more residents across Fresno County facing similar issues. Each time, I provided the same support: information, documentation, and the confidence that comes from knowing someone in authority has your back. Not every situation ended with arrests and criminal charges like the Thompson case, but most resulted in HOAs backing down once they realized residents knew the law and weren't afraid to fight. The statewide HOA oversight program moved forward through California's bureaucratic process. I testified before legislative committees, gave interviews to news outlets covering the issue, and consulted with agricultural commissioners in other counties interested in similar initiatives. What had started as me defending my tomato plants had grown into a genuine reform movement. Jennifer won her city council seat in a landslide, running on a platform of government accountability and community empowerment. Robert became the new HOA president of Meadowbrook, bringing decades of military leadership experience to the role. Susan started a nonprofit that helped HOA residents across California understand their rights and challenge unfair regulations. As for me, I continued my work as agricultural commissioner, but with a broader perspective on what that role could mean. Agriculture wasn't just about commercial farming and large-scale operations. It was about every person's right to grow food, to connect with the land, to make sustainable choices for their families and communities. My garden continued to flourish, a living testament to the principle that had started everything. Your property should be yours to use as you see fit, as long as you're not harming others. The vegetables I grew fed my family, supplemented donations to food banks, and provided seeds and starts for neighbors who were beginning their own garden journeys. Sometimes I still thought about that first day, hearing Patricia's heels clicking up my driveway, seeing her disapproving sneer as she surveyed my garden, feeling the anger rise as she handed me that violation notice. I'd been so close to just complying, to ripping everything out and planting boring grass to avoid the conflict. It would have been easier, but easier isn't always right. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand your ground, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you're not sure you'll win, even when everyone else tells you to just follow the rules and not make waves. My tomatoes were delicious proof that I'd made the right choice.